What is going on, guys, and welcome back to the channel. Now, today is going to be a big day for Project CB9. This will be the last time you see this car in OEM 4-lug wheels and factory height suspension. And as you saw in the last video, we had to go to the yard and get some parts from another Accord because today starts the 5-lug conversion. I'm going to show you all the steps and tools that's required to convert your CB7 or CB9 Accord for a 5-lug setup on the backside. So let's go ahead, get our tools ready, and get this process officially started. All right, guys, one last look at the factory suspension in OEM 4-lug 15-inch wheels on Project CB9. We're gonna start lifting this car up in the air, pulling the wheels and tires off, ripping the suspension apart, and getting some components replaced. So one last look in stock form before we go ahead and start working on this car. We'll go ahead and pull some measurements from the top of the fender down to the ground as well on both front and on the rear side. And here's the main components that'll start the 5-lug conversion. These are the rear spindles from a 1997 EX Accord. We'll get into more specifics later, but we'll just take some visual notes of how this car looks in stock format right here. Rear 3/4 view on driver's side, on the back side right there, and the rear 3/4 view on the passenger side. Okay, let's go ahead and take some measurements from the ground up to the top fenders. We'll take some notes, and then once all is said and done, we'll compare, see what kind of measurements we'll come up with after the suspension, 5-lug conversion, and the wheels and tires go into place. Front driver's side from ground to fender, 26 1/4. Rear driver's side fender, 26 1/8. Rear passenger side, 26 1/8. Front passenger side, 27 1/4. Okay, so first step of the process, I'm gonna go ahead and raise up the front of the car, put some jack stands under, raise up the back car, put the jack stands underneath, and we're gonna go ahead and remove the wheels and tires. These wheels are actually sold. They're going overseas to Europe. So we need to go up to the tire shop, have the tires removed. I'll go to the dump, discard the tires, and get the wheels prepped for shipment. Let's go ahead and take care of this. All right, went ahead and spread out the tools I'll need for this job on this piece of carpet, make things easier. So now I'll officially get started on removing this rear knuckle assembly from Project CB9. So first things I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go ahead and remove this caliper assembly. And there's two 12mm bolts right here, one on the top and one on the bottom. I'm gonna go ahead and remove that and basically slide off the caliper from the rotor right here. And I'm also gonna take these bolts right here off the knuckle, which is a bracket for the brake line. So I'll take those bolts off as well. So both these caliper bolts and these bracket bolts right here is a 12mm. So let's go ahead and remove those bolts. Okay, the brake caliper and the brake caliper bracket has been successfully removed. I support the brake caliper shown up here on the control arm. So it's best way, don't let that thing dangle down. Now the next step, if your car has ABS, there's gonna be an ABS sensor on the bottom of this knuckle assembly. Let me show you what's that. So right here on the bottom of the knuckle assembly, you got two 12mm bolts, one right here, one right here. Go ahead and undo those, and the wheel sensor should separate from the bottom of the knuckle. So we'll go ahead and take care of that. Okay, now looking from the top side of the swing arm right here, there's two 17mm bolts we need to remove. So one is right here, and the other one is right here, right by the strut. We need to go ahead and remove those two 17mm nuts. So let's go ahead and take care of that. Okay, since there's visibility issues, showing you exactly what I'm doing, working behind the dust shield, basically these are the two nuts I just removed. So now we're gonna move on to these two lower nuts right here, which are both 17mm. All right, on the upper ball joint, we got this 10mm right here. We need to go ahead and take this off, and that'll expose the bolt that's underneath this cover. And then we'll go ahead and take this bolt off, and I'm gonna go ahead and put a special tool on there. So basically what I'm gonna use is a Pitman arm puller, and it basically slides in position right here. It'll tighten up against the bolt. And then once I drive it with my impact driver, it's actually gonna push this upper control arm away from the spindle right here. So let's go ahead and take care of this part. Okay, this is the Pitman arm tool I'm talking about. So basically these ledges right here have to go above the metal right here on this side and this side right here. So basically I'm just gonna slide this over. And basically I need to make sure that this stud matches this pin right here. So I'm gonna go ahead and snug it up, and I'll take my impact driver to it. Okay, so it's snug right there. And then go ahead, get your 19mm onto your impact driver. And then we'll go ahead and tighten this thing up, and it should pop right off. And looking at this boot right here, seeing how cracked and dry rot this thing is, this has probably reached the end of its lifespan, but we got something nice that's gonna go in place. And we'll go over that later. Okay, looking at our reference knuckle assembly, so I can show you what's going on behind there. We only got two more bolts holding in position. This right here, the lower shock bolt, and we got this one long bolt right here. And then once this bolt and this bolt is removed, we should be able to grab our knuckle assembly and just basically take it right off the car. So hopefully it goes smooth. We'll see what happens. All right, CB9 knuckle assembly is officially removed. Now, it's tough to get out. Let me go ahead and show you a trick of the trade. Now, see this pin right here and this pin right here? It was kind of stuck on the inside. So what I did is I went ahead and took a hammer and just knocked it to the front side and knocked this one to the back side, and basically just spread it apart. And I was able to grab the knuckle assembly and get it out. Be careful of this brake line. You have to basically go underneath this brake line right here. And there's basically a side-by-side comparison. There's CB9, and there's our donor right there. So first things first, before we go and put our donor knuckle assembly in, I need to go ahead and remove this rusted wheel sensor. Now, the junkyard that I got this from, I was very upset. I showed them how rusted this thing was, and the wire was snapped on the backside, but they weren't having it. They were charging me full price for the knuckle and this wheel sensor. So it is what it is. And I'm gonna go ahead and take off this caliper bracket, because this one's a lot more rusted than our Florida one right here. So I'm gonna take my Florida one, transfer it over. And all the hardware that came from the Florida CB9, we're gonna reuse this, even though I got the hardware from the Virginia knuckle assembly. It's got a little bit more surface rust, so I'm gonna stick with this one. So let me go ahead and prep this knuckle assembly, and then we'll go ahead and start the reassembly process. Okay, well, I have the knuckle assembly out of the car. Figured it'd be easier to do this step. We're gonna go and replace this upper control arm. Now, since this car is gonna be lowered, we need some adjustment. So SBC makes this adjustable upper control arm right here. And there's the part number for your reference, if you wanna put this on your CB7, CB9. Okay, so these two bolts right here, these are 14 millimeters. So I'm gonna try and take my 14 millimeter impact, see if I can get up there, buzz them off. If not, I'll just do them by hand with my socket. Okay, the rear knuckle assembly is mocked up in position right now. Let me go ahead and show you guys an example of what to tighten up. Okay, so you want to go ahead and tighten up the top two 17 millimeters, also the bottom two 17 millimeters, also the long bolt and nut that goes through this area, and then the bolt that goes through the lower shock. So we get those things tightened up. So we want to go ahead, tighten up these 4 nuts, these 2 long bolts, and also connect SBC upper control arm to this knuckle. And we'll go to the next step. And then we also want to go ahead and reattach our wheel sensor to the bottom of the knuckle assembly behind this dust shield right here. All right, guys, the EX sedan rear knuckle is now installed in Project CB9. Everything is now tightened up. Now we need to go ahead and replace this 4-lug hub with a 5-lug unit. I'm gonna show you guys how to do this. So you see this cap right here? You wanna take your screwdriver and you wanna go right on the lip right there, and we're gonna be tapping this thing out. So basically we're gonna rotate this thing and just take the screwdriver and hammer, tap this thing, and basically this cap should come right out. And that'll expose the main axle nut right there. So let's go ahead and take care of this. Okay, we've now exposed the axle nut right here. And as you can see on this nut, there's an indention on this axle shaft. So I'm gonna go ahead and take my screwdriver and hammer and try and bend this out as best I can. And then we'll go ahead and buzz off this nut right here. Okay, bad news, guys. I don't have this size impact socket. This is not a 36 millimeter like the front. I need to go ahead and do some research on what size this is and go ahead and place an order for an impact socket. So basically we need to take this nut off and get this 4-lug hub pulled off. And then we need to take the 5-lug, slide in position, and put that nut back on. Okay, the main spindle nut is now removed. Had to go up to Harbor Freight and pick up a 32 millimeter impact socket. Got it right off. And this is our old 4-lug hub right here. Had to get removed. And what we're going to be installing here is a 5-lug 9701 Honda Prelude rear hub assembly. This is 5-lug right here. Now if I do a side-by-side comparison, they're basically the same height. However, there's one major difference. You see how shallow this bearing is right here? And this bearing comes upwards a little bit. So this bearing is a lot thicker than what the cord is. So let me show you what's going on here. This is very important. Pay attention. So if I put this old one back in position, and I take this washer right here that was on here, slide right on, and this is the factory nut. All right, so I'm gonna count how many turns we have with this indentation. So the thread count's very important right here. So I'm gonna go ahead and do some turns, tell you how many turns I have. All right, so I have 8 turns with the factory setup. Let me go ahead and show you what's going on with the Honda Prelude. All right, using this factory QA washer, I'll put this in position. I'm gonna take this factory nut, see how many turns we have. I literally have 3 turns on this, which is 3 threads. That's very dangerous. I don't recommend doing that. Now here's what the solution is. Okay, just came back from Napa Auto Parts. This is a Mazda 626, 1988 through 2002, I believe, years, which is a spindle lock nut. As you can see, there's a built-in washer on this nut right here. Now look at the Honda one, there's no built-in washer. Now we're gonna go ahead and omit this Allen key washer. See how thick that is? That's about 1 or 2 threads right there. And doing a side-by-side comparison of the Honda nut versus the Mazda nut, this is the Honda one. As you can see, there's a bevel right here. So that's about 1 or 2 threads worth. And you can see at the Mazda, basically there's no bevel. Those threads start immediately once it touches this built-in washer right here. So it's gonna gain us another 2 turns of the threads. So basically that's the 2 main differences between the Mazda 626 nut versus the Honda OEM nut right here. So we're gonna use this Mazda 626 nut. And there's the part number for your reference, 630-1642. All right, let's go ahead and install this nut on the hub. Okay, so we'll do a test on this Mazda 626 nut to see how many thread turns we have on this compared to the Honda OEM. Now remember, I'm not using this washer right here, which accounts for about 1 or 2 threads because you got this built-in washer on this Mazda 626 nut. So I put a piece of tape here on the nut just so we can keep track. So let's go ahead and see how many turns we have. Okay, so about 6 threads compared to the Honda OEM, which is 2.5, 3 threads. All right, so I believe this is gonna work. We're gonna go ahead and torque this to Honda specification. Okay, next step of this process, let's go ahead and torque this nut to 132 foot-pounds as per Honda. Okay, the Honda spindle nut is now torqued down to Honda specifications, and I got the protective cap back into place. Now, next step, we need to go ahead and put a 5-lug rotor into place. And what the recipe calls for is an Integra Type R rear rotors. So this is from Detroit Axle. I've used these in the past. Very good products in my opinion for the money. And there's the part number for your reference. So let's go ahead and clean up this rotor from all the oils from the manufacturing. So we'll go ahead and take the Integra Type R rotor and we'll slide it onto the Prelude 5-lug hub here. And then we'll go ahead and put our caliper bracket back in position. And then we'll go ahead, put the caliper bracket back on, take our cord caliper, put it back on, and then we'll take our bracket with the 2 12mm and secure it to knuckle assembly. So let's go ahead and take care of the final steps here. All right, ladies and gentlemen, got a 5-lug conversion on the back of Project CB9. Got the 97 EX sedan rear knuckles. Got an adjustable upper control arm right here to adjust the camber since this car's gonna be lowered. Got Integra Type R rear rotors, and got Prelude 97 to 01 5-lug hubs. That's basically the recipe for this car right here. Now we need to go ahead and take care of the other side. Other side, I'm not gonna get as many details as I did this one, so it's gonna be mostly cliff notes. So let's go ahead and take care of the driver's side now. Okay, driver's side knuckle assembly removed from project CB9. Now this only took about 45 to 50 minutes, which ain't too bad. Let me go ahead and show you guys the highlights of how I removed this thing. Starting with the top, went ahead and took off the 14mm bolts, holding this upper control arm because we're gonna put the adjustable one in place. And then moving on down the line, you got this swing arm right here with the two 17mm bolts, and there's two lower 17mm bolts as well. And then there's one long bolt that goes through this end right here, and then you got the knuckle, and then this end. So I had to hold this side with a 17mm. Well, I had to take this one off because it basically kept free spinning. So it's just a note of advice. And then you got the lower shock mount. That's also a 17mm right there. Went ahead and took the brake caliper off. I believe these bolts are 12mm right here. And then what holds on to the knuckle assembly, these are also 12mm. And then the caliper bracket themselves on the back of the knuckle, those are 14mm. And then the speed sensor right here, those are held on with two 12mm bolts. Almost forgot that at the end. So make sure, take those bolts off on the underside of the knuckle. I almost forgot this, don't want to break that. And then once you feed that knuckle on the inside of this brake line like so, and you got a few 17mm holding it in place, top and bottom, then we can go ahead and get that long bolt in place. But it's very tough to get these on the inside of the knuckle. That gave me trouble, and also lining this bolt up, that gave me trouble as well. Hopefully it's smooth sailing, so let's go ahead and reassemble this thing. Okay, now I'm at the point where I've mounted the prelude hub onto the knuckle assembly, and I figure this is a very important part, so I'm gonna go over it again. Now the factory uses this keyway washer right here, and if we were to use this washer, and if we reused the Honda nut, I'm gonna show you how many turns we get. There's that notch right there to keep track. So that's 2.5 with that washer. That is just not adequate right there. And we're gonna take this off. We're gonna try it without the washer. Now I've taken the washer off because we can get more turns. Now I've taken the washer off, but we cannot reuse this Honda nut because this flange right here is not long enough to go contact this bearing area right here. So what was recommended to use is a 1988 through 2002 Mazda 626 spindle lock nut. And there's the part number for your reference. So the main differences between the Honda OEM nut and the Mazda 626 nut is you have a larger flange, and that's going to contact the ball bearing right there. As you can see on the Honda OEM nut, there's an extreme bevel right there, which takes away 1 or 2 threads. And right here in the Mazda 626 nut, basically the threads start immediately. So it'll give you an extra 1 or 2 turns right there. It's going to be contacting the bearing right there. It's going to be pushing against there. So just to give you a test on this, so how many turns we can get. Okay, about 6.5 turns. That's much safer than 3 turns. So I'm gonna go ahead and torque this to factory spec, and I'll be much happier having much more thread engagement right there. So let's go ahead and torque this to Honda specification, and then we'll go ahead and reinstall the dust cap cover. And here's the majority of the tools I use for this job. Got a 1/2-inch ratchet, 3/8 ratchet, various extensions, 17mm wrenches, 14mm wrenches, 12mm wrenches, and 10mm wrenches, flathead screwdriver, Phillips head screwdriver, thread locker blue, various sockets, 10mm, 12mm, 14mm, 14mm deep, and 17mm deep impact sockets, 19mm, 17, 14, and 32 for the spindle nut. Pitman arm puller, pliers, and last but not least, my 1/2-inch electric impact gun. This thing is a beast. If you don't have one of these things and you work on cars a lot, highly recommend getting one of these things. All right, guys, we finally got the back end of Project CB9 fully converted to a 5-lug setup. Now, the main reason I had to change out the knuckles of the sedan version is because the Prelude hubs won't fit on wagon spindle shafts. But if you're working on an EX Accord sedan or coupe, it should only be changing out the rear hub and rear disc rotors. However, if you're working with an LX or DX model, I believe you have to convert the backside to a rear disc brake setup. Anyhow, just make sure you torque that Mazda spindle nut to the Honda factory torque spec of 134 foot-pounds. And for an extra security measure, go ahead and use a little thread lock on those as well. Anyhow, Project CB9 is now ready to receive some 5-lug wheels, which sure beats the limited selection of 4-lug wheels available. And be sure to stay tuned for the next video, where I show you how to do the front side of Project CB9 getting converted, along with the suspension rebuilding as well. And if you guys like this video, please give me a thumbs up. Thanks for watching and have a fantastic day.